Welcome to the In Vivo Project podcast, where we talk about real world, real life scenarios that empower men to embrace vulnerability so they can live life to the fullest. My name's Eric Payton. I'm your host. And today I'm joined by Rachel Snyder. Rachel is a great friend of mine and also happens to be one of my very first clients that I had back in 2015, and I'm super excited to have her on. So, Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Eric. And I didn't realize this was exclusively for men, so I feel very special now that I've been asked to participate.
Yeah, you should. I mean, definitely, the majority of this podcast is about empowering men to embrace that vulnerability, which is it's a huge topic in today's world. In my opinion, there's not enough guys out there that are really talking about the things that are really going on with them. So, but I definitely wanted to have you on, because you're such a pleasure to be around. It's always a good time when you're around. But also, I really wanted to talk about how we met back in 2015 and what brought that about.
Yeah, it's a little hard to go back in time there, Eric, but for you and your listeners, I will do that. I am a boy mom. So when you talk about boys being vulnerable, I get it. Probably maybe a lot more than a lot of people do. We met under circumstances. I was probably in one of the darkest places of my life due to the fact that several years earlier in 2011, the boys and I lost their father to Lou Gehrig's disease. And that was the beginning of the spiral for my oldest son, John, who at the time my husband was diagnosed was 11, and my younger son, Jake. There's 4 years between them. So John lasted 3 years, fought his battle well, ended well. And shortly thereafter, John the third went off the rails. And it was during this time that I wasn't sure what was actually going on with him, how much of it was grief, how much of it was adolescence, or how much of it, heaven forbid, might be drug use. So long story short, we relocated from Minneapolis to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And John had gone through an Outward Bound program. He had gone through a Hazelden program. I had tried to get him arrested he was selling drugs, he was buying drugs, he was stealing things to pay for drugs. And eventually we did a full-blown intervention. He ended up in rehab in Pennsylvania, and he agreed to go for 10 days. I flew him up there, checked him in, and turned around and left. I had no idea what was actually going to happen. While John was in rehab, Jake and I moved to Dallas because one of the best pieces of advice I had been given was do not put the addict back in their same environment.
Right.
Well, I took it seriously and literally, and Jake and I physically moved to the Dallas area. And I do have to disclose that I told Jake that this was now his time and he wanted to play football in Texas. So there you go. Full disclosure.
Right.
So I go to pick up John. He had started rehab in October. As he likes to say, I drank the Kool-Aid, and he ended up staying for 4 months.
Right.
Because when John checked in, he was 17. I still had some say-so in what was going to happen to him. In February, he was going to turn 18. And at that point, I knew my ability to control his circumstances was going to be done.
Yeah.
So I go to pick him up, and he confides to me that somebody very famous had just checked in, and he'd had a couple of sessions with him. And I said, would I know who that is? And he goes, well, I can't tell you till I'm officially released.
Right.
So we're on the plane ride home, and he tells me it was Johnny Manziel.
Right.
The boy wonder of football.
Yeah.
In rehab with my son. Okay, not exactly how I would have liked for him to have met Johnny Manziel.
Right.
But
yeah.
So after we get here to Dallas, and after he checks out of rehab, I'm like, great. We signed this big letter. He's going to do, 90 meetings in 90 days or 3 meetings a day. Anyway, he agrees to do the whole schmear.
The whole aftercare plan. Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, great. I was going to Al-Anon. I was doing some things to try and get ready for all of this. And he comes home and he says, okay, I'm going to a meeting. I said, great. See ya. So he goes to this meeting and goes back, and a couple of weeks go by and he's met someone at the meeting. Now, I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack, but I'm like, excuse me, I thought relationships were off limits, especially with other people who are in the program.
Correct. Yeah, they call that the 13th step.
Well,
there's only 12.
Well, I was like, okay, I don't think this is a good thing. Maybe you should talk to your counselor that's calling from Karen, which unbeknownst to me, he wasn't answering any of those phone calls.
Yeah.
But kept telling me he had it all under control.
Yeah.
So because of his relationship with the rehab center, we were doing work with a counselor here in Dallas who I think we had seen her 3 or 4 times, and I was ready to be done.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there at an appointment. She's like, there's somebody I'd like for you to meet. Somebody that I think could really help you with John. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And you know that.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you were like, oh yeah. I'm like, yeah, nice guy. What are you going to do for me?
Right.
Okay. Which at this point in time, I'm just exhausted by it all.
Yeah.
So one thing led to another, Eric. And yes, somehow or another, I was convinced to give it a go, because what did I have to lose at this point?
Yeah.
John was at a point where he was using again. He was seeing this gal. He was still living at my house and triggering all of those terrible feelings in me again. I couldn't trust him. I didn't believe him. I wasn't liking how I was feeling, and I had no idea where this was going, but I didn't think it was going to end well.
Yeah.
So brought you on board, and I'm not sure how long it took for us to have our own intervention. Not very long.
No, we did. I really think we'd had one conversation about what was going on. And I think one of the big reasons why I wanted to bring you on is to emphasize to other people that might be out there listening that are in the same situation right now, that you mentioned that the aftercare program was what was given to John and said, hey, do the aftercare program. And what I can tell you from doing this for 13 years, the people who do the aftercare program are successful, and the people who do not do the aftercare program are not successful. And so that was really the conversation that we had. And we sat down with John and said, hey, listen, here's the aftercare program. If you want to keep hanging and living with your mom, and we're going to look at possibly doing some sober living, because at that point you were just like, I can't do this anymore. And I said, well, let's get him into sober living. That'll be good for him anyway. Going back to your original thing when they said, hey, don't bring the person back inside the home, right? Which is really hard for parents a lot of times because they love their kids. But when we're talking about addiction and the mental health stuff, it's really good to have that separation, especially in the beginning. So we really sat down with John and said, hey, either the aftercare program or you're on your own. And like John, we know John, he called our bluff and started packing up his car, and he took off, which is, the next thing, that leads us into, what I want parents to hear, what we were able to do collectively when John said, hey, I'm not doing this. And he took off. So talk maybe just a little bit to the parents out there that maybe have been in that situation or feel fearful of being in that situation where the person says, hey, we're not going to do the healthy thing. We're going to do the unhealthy thing. And what that felt like and looked like for you when he took off.
Oh, it was brutal. You were standing right there next to me. And you said, Rachel, I want you to do these 3 things. I never will forget it. You said, I want you to cut off the phone.
Yeah.
I want you to cancel his driver's license insurance, his car insurance. And I want you to cancel his health insurance.
Yeah.
And I looked at you and I said, I can do 2 of the 3.
Yeah.
His dad died of catastrophic illness. I cannot cancel his health insurance, but I will do the other 2.
Yeah.
It was like a piece of your heart just being ripped out. And John, I never will forget it. He's in the bedroom going, I'll come back and get the furniture. And you're saying, you take whatever you can put in this plastic bag, in this black plastic bag, and you're leaving.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
This is not your furniture. Did you buy it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't think I thought my husband's death was hard, but wow, when you're watching your child do something that you know is going to not have great consequences, and you know they could bring ultimate harm and even death to themselves.
Yeah.
Like I didn't think I could do it, and I'm sure a lot of parents don't think they can.
Yeah.
But I did, and it got worse.
Yeah.
Before it got better.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is that I trusted you, and I still had another child to raise.
Right.
I still had this life and this responsibility. And John was not in a place to want to accept anything that I could offer him. And I'm sure a lot of people, parents especially, have felt that way too. Oh, this kid, he thinks he knows everything. And finally, you have to get to a point where you just have to bless and release.
Yeah.
And I did. And I released him to you.
Yeah.
And it was the start of something that would ultimately turn out very well. Yeah. But we had a lot. We did the cha-cha. We're still doing the cha-cha. We're going forward and 2 steps back, Eric. That's the story of our life.
Yeah, but I love the fact that and I want parents to hear this too, is that you have to let your kids have real world consequences if they're gonna learn how to do what you just said, the cha-cha, right? Like they have to be able to experience that, to get knocked down and then have the epiphany like John had when he was homeless, living in a tent, and he finally called me and said, hey, remember when you said I could do this, go to sober living, get some support back from my mom? Well, I'm ready. And he was ready at that point, and that was the phone call that brought him back to Dallas. He went to sober living. He got a job working at a car wash, riding a bicycle. He lost his car. Started going back to college, right?
Yes.
Finished his degree, and now he is gone from working at a car wash, riding a bike, to he's a director of admissions at a drug and alcohol rehab, right?
Who would have thought?
Right.
Who would have thought? If you had told me that would happen, I would have been like, there is no way.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
But I think that experience of learning that, hey, there are consequences is what's helped him, in my opinion, the most on his journey, right? And like you said, it's not perfect. We'd be lying to everybody if we said, hey, he's got no more problems anymore. He's just a perfect, shining example of what recovery looks like. It's just not realistic. But what I can tell you is that at the end of the day, John he's got a great heart. He's still only 26. We met when he was 18. So we've been together for 8 years. Now, thankfully it hasn't been paid 8 years. But I'm like that with all my clients, right? Once you're in the family, you're in the family. You're not getting rid of me unless you just really, really want to get rid of me. And usually it's because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But it's been really cool to see his journey and what it's looked like. And again, it's not perfect. I mean, even today, he's got 2 kids, right?
He does. I'm a yaya.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you said yeah, because I was going to say the G word. That's probably,
No,
yeah.
I'm a yaya. Grayson
Yeah.
is 3 and Autumn is 1.
Yeah. So maybe just talk a little bit about what that's been like to watch. He came back, he got his degree. He's been in the workforce for several years now. What has that been like for you?
It's another challenge. And, it's been interesting too, because we all think that when our children grow up and become adults, that they're magically going to get the brain switched on to another level and they'll make good decisions and they'll think things through and their rational mind will kick in. On some things, yes, it does. But John, he just has it in his nature. He makes things much more difficult than they need to be. And I hate that for him, but that's his journey. That's his journey. And having children, for those of you that have children, it is one of the hardest jobs. It is one of the most loved jobs, and yet is one of the most thankless jobs out there. And my 2 sons are very different, and I've parented them the same way, yet with completely different results. But seeing John now as a parent, what I do know is that since he lost his father when he was 14, he is determined. Now, it's not perfect. He is determined, though, to be there for his children. And he loves both of those kids like a dad. Yeah. And I know where his heart is, and I know the values that he does ascribe to. Unfortunately, he's not, he married their mother. They did get married, and that was a rocky road from the beginning. And unfortunately, they are divorced now. Yeah. So my heart breaks for these little people that are living in this somewhat chaotic world. Mm-hmm. But I do know that both of their parents love them. I do know that John does struggle still, though, with his own emotional development. He's got a big responsibility. He has a big job. Parenting is just, it's a bigger piece too. Yeah. So when you are that young and you have these little people and you have a big job, do I have my moments where I wonder, we're walking a tight line here. Yeah. But I have really had to surrender my son, which I did a while ago, but it's a continuous process. Yeah. And so I just, I'm thankful, and I'm very grateful that God has a promise and a provision and a protection for all of us. And I especially ask him to bestow that on John. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think one of the biggest things, because I've been out talking to some parents again, and, they're afraid to let them fail. And they're mortified when they come back that if they make one mistake, that everything's off the rails. So I love that you've been able to hopefully speak to somebody out there and say, hey, it's okay to let them fail and figure it out. And then just because life doesn't happen exactly the way we think it's supposed to happen, which is, to me, is a setup, that doesn't mean that life is over as we know it.
Exactly.
So I really, I hope if somebody's out there listening that they hear that, because I think, again, that's one of the most important things that parents need to hear are those two things. So I think, what advice would you give to somebody out there that has a loved one that's struggling?
There's so much I could say, Eric. It's so we all take the same journey, but we all do it differently. And the first thing that I would suggest is get an advocate such as yourself. Reach out to someone who has made this journey themselves and who has taken a lot of people on this journey and who can give you some perspective, because I know that I felt very isolated. I did not have any other friends that were having this difficulty. Well, first of all, they didn't lose their spouse or a father. Wow. And then second of all, the drug thing was, I was just slow to the take on that. I really didn't believe that would be an issue or could be an issue. But we know, especially now with what's going on in this country and drugs and targeting these children at even younger ages, that you have to be mindful and you have to be educated. And the best thing that you can do and what you're doing with this program is to say, I'm here. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Yeah. You've got the expertise and the perspective that a lot of us didn't have. You also have the ability to say, okay, if this is where you're at, you've tried this, you've tried this, you've tried this. Yes, you're frustrated. Maybe it's time to regroup. Maybe it's time to let go. Maybe it's time to step back. You can distance yourself enough from those of us that are in the moment to say, okay, let's look at this a little differently, because it's hard when you're in the middle of it all. And addicts thrive on chaos. They thrive on, they've got to have an instant answer. You got to tell them right now. Yeah. And one of the things that I've learned so well from you and the work that we've done is to just take a breath. And not everything has to be dealt with right away. Yeah. You're very good at being able to read that for both the addict and for the family. Yeah. So it is, and this is not going to be, it may never be completely fixed. There are cracks in our relationship that may never be fully restored. Sure. But that's also part of the journey of raising adult children, which we could spend a whole nother hour on, whether they have addiction issues or anything else. Parenting changes as your children grow. And I have really been surprised too. I know I'm off target a little bit, but there are a lot of parents that didn't think they'd have issues with their adult children. And they are finding now lots of things are happening. They're holding grandchildren hostage. They're doing all kinds of things. And it's a whole different ballgame out there. Yeah. So there's a lot to wrestle with, but having been through this and still going through this journey, I can truly say that it is important to reach out to a source of information that can give you access to other people like me. If you've always known my door's open too. If somebody needs to call me and just have that conversation too, like you're a parent, you went through this, you dealt, because you do. It can be a very isolating and lonely experience.
Yeah, such good advice. And so anybody that's listening out there, you can reach out to us at the In Vivo Project on social media. theinvivoproject.com is where you can find us on the website. And if you've heard anything that Rachel said today and you want to get in touch with her, all you got to do is reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get in touch with her. So Rachel, thank you so much for coming on today. Like I said, it's always an honor to have you on. And I look forward to maybe having you on again soon in the future.
My pleasure, Eric. Godspeed to you and your listeners.
Awesome. Thank you.